Okay, so chapter 96 of Sugito Akira's Boku Girl has this very short pair of scenes where one of the main characters, Takeru, is meeting his father. The little sister Mei tells the father quite nonchalantly, brother and Mizuki are getting married. What follows is this brief exchange where the father offers to introduce some women to Takeru, whose concerns are instantly allayed when he notices that Mizuki is visibly female. Without a worry, the father ends up being the sort of lecherous oyaji who asks whether Takeru would do anything if they were alone. Now, Takeru denies doing anything, if only somewhat awkwardly, because he's trying to hide the fact that he has done something. The father responds back with, "It seems you're into men after all." But then the father tries to bring this conversation back to non-gendered perspectives by saying, "I can't see any decisiveness in you. That's not like you at all." He ends the scene with, "Stopping halfway is what I hate most in the world." And tellingly, this scene is then followed up by Mizuki bathing, the subject of which is her trying to come to a decision as to whether she should go back to being a boy or remain a girl. The father's chastising implies an anchoring of decisiveness to a masculinity, but that scene-to-scene connection implies that such decisiveness is not necessarily a slave to masculinity. And that's really interesting. Boku Girl is a romantic comedy by Sugito Akira where the main character Mizuki is bothered by his feminine appearance. After catching the attention of the Norse trickster Loki, Mizuki turns into a girl. Over the course of the story, Mizuki deals with the challenges of female anatomy. At the same time, due to a series of fairly arbitrary circumstances, Mizuki changes from boy to girl back to boy again until it climaxes at a final decision that is ultimately Mizuki's to make. Now, this image isn't necessarily unique to Boku Girl, given that Japan's transgender material really surged in the mid-90s due to legislative changes in 1996 on gender reassignment surgery. Literature has tackled the space between male and female bodies in works such as Nomachi Mineko's Okama Dakuro o El Yatemasu, or a more exploratory piece such as The Genealogy of the Joso, which are men dressing up in female attire, in Matsuhashi Junko's 2008 book Joso to Nihonjin. This idea of relationships coming out of gender-bender stories is notable in manga as well. For instance, Mikio Suda's The Day of Revolution looks at similar ideas of bodies being reconstituted through another sex. A boy who undergoes surgery to save his life only to become a woman. The Day of Revolution is a playful, if mainly uncritical, look at what it means to change in such fundamental ways. Hiroyuki Nishimori's Tenshi na Konomaiki, or Cheeky Angel, looks at similar ideas, though separates the physicality of a body from a perception of it. Through a genie, the protagonist Megami is turned into this totem of femininity, and thus the dramatic arc is dependent on a return to what seems to be an innate masculinity. Another is Haruse Hiroki's Idol Pretender, which shares these bodily transformations through a potion and is doubly fixated on ideas of performance. After all, Idol Pretender is a story about a boy who turns into a girl that is performing as an idol, and so beneath its short tail lies what seemed to be a stratification of performativity. And that's a major key word here, performativity. There are quite a few nuances and contours to performativity and its changes on the particular lens, but I want to focus particularly on Judith Butler's gender performativity. Because while Boku Girl is unlikely an intentional response or knowingly incorporating Butlerian performativity, Butler's lens in conjunction with Boku Girl reveals some telling markers on the instability of gender, and more broadly, subjectivity. After all, Butler very notably declared that gender is in no way a stable identity or locus of agency from which various acts proceed. Rather, it's an identity tenuously constituted in time, an identity instituted through a stylized repetition of facts. In other words, there is no innateness to gender that thus defines the markers of gender. Rather, gender perseveres through continual actions that constitute the subject through that gender. To be a man, you are constantly doing man through structures often with power outside of you. The same would be to become woman. In this lens, Gender Bender's series can be easily considered as to how Japanese writers might conceive of what would be otherwise potentially rigid gendered structures. Being a man who becomes a woman is also tied to understanding how to act woman, itself a series of conterminous expectations of performer and audience. So why Boku Girl? What makes Boku Girl so interesting as a springboard of studying performativity? Well, it's because of how brazen it is, with the body as a focal point of both as upholders of heteronormativity and yet as sites upon which they are questioned. The very ecchi jokes that underlie this gender bender series also reveal how bodies are presented, flitting between male and female spaces to display its anxieties. But let's back up a bit. We have to remember that Boku Girl is a post-Shimura text. I've discussed Shimura's famous work before, Horo Musuko, and how it de-radicalizes gender in favor of a broad, hopeful construct of love that connects all the characters together. Sugiro's commented, if only briefly, about Horo Musuko as well. Responding to a belly band comment from Shimura, Sugiro says that among Shimura-sensei's works, my favorite is Horo Musuko. The exciting, pure psychological depiction of the characters in Horo Musuko made my heart race with excitement. And you can see how these texts behave relationally. Horo Musuko depicts characters with what seem to be confident senses of the self that are challenged by outward pressures like social practices, bullying, and belonging. In comparison, Boku Girl inverts those ideas through having a chaotic self that exists in a seemingly tolerant environment that still falls to traps of heteronormativity. In fact, it's unsurprising that of all of Boku Girl's stories, the only major multi-chapter arc is the play and theater, itself a fixation in both the Horo Musuko manga and anime, and given that the play is a manifestation of performance, people performing genders by performing as gendered characters, these similarities construct a dialogue between the two. But Boku Girls is a rewriting of any physicality because Loki is offering Mizuki the choice to choose your own gender. And this is where the body comes in. Boku Girl's playful body switching is a literal rendition of an anxious bodily metaphor. The continuous constitution and reconstitution between male and female is played out by Mizuki's psyche, and as she begins to perform in a specific way through specific contexts, her body and her identity changes. After all, she began as a boy intent on upholding this image of manliness, but it's not just a question of how do I deal with being a girl when I'm a boy, but rather questions of an innate natural sensation as it is presented. Remember, Loki offers Mizuki a choice, but Mizuki's response isn't just I'll go back. Rather, Mizuki's identity has been reconstructed through these experiences so innately that it emphasizes the idea that we are constantly interpolated into a being. To be is to do. To be a man is to do what a man does. To be a woman is to do what a woman does. In Boku Girl, Mizuki is given a choice: fall in love with Fujiwara and become a man, or fall in love with Takeru to become a woman. This is an example of where the subject is given a choice, but its parameters fall outside of it. It's not just about the heterosexual relationship, but more broadly how a subject may still reconstitute themselves through performances that can fall under prevailing expectations. But here's the catch. It's not just Mizuki. And this is why Boku Girl is such a fascinating piece on performativity. Whereas Horo Musuko is laser focused on how subjects try to reconstitute themselves through doing differently, Boku Girl looks at how those environments can construct modes of doing. Takeru loves fish because his dad loves fish. Mizuki developed a manliness complex because her father dictated such. Fujiwara wanted to become someone she thought Takeru would like, so she changed herself. Subjects performing to be. There is very little innateness to them other than exterior forces constructing them. And this applies in some ways to bodies. Mizuki's body is presented as a totality in the first chapter, but it's Loki's sting that begins the transformation. If we borrow from feminist Julia Kristeva, the male would be the holistic totality. The wasp penetrating Mizuki's body constitutes the first act of penetration that is connected to the feminine. And again, it's not just Mizuki. Loki presents herself as a lolly, partly because it seems to emphasize the androgynous nature of the character, inhabiting both male and female. After all, after she disappears, Takeru brings up that dissonance by clearly stating that Loki is a boy's name. For Yamada, his body reveals these same anxieties, but while Mizuki's is more fundamentally biological, Yamada's is more abstract. After all, his drive for his company is manifest through what seems to be deviant behavior. He wears women's lingerie. He can only be himself when such masculinities are challenged. While Butler's performativity dissuades from a fundamentalist position on biology, these cases, considered metaphorically, can reveal how Boku Girl displays practices that cover or uncover various bodies, masquerading or revealing the subject in specific ways. What is covered up and with what is just as much a doing to construct or challenge images of a self. And Boku Girl's ending is a simple yet concise rendition of how unstable gender may be, and yet how powerful the heteronormative structure is. Mizuki trained to become manly, that there was this innate thing to it that seemed to make it manly. But what happens? Well, Mizuki makes a decision. She becomes a girl permanently. She becomes the captain of the Aikido club. There may not be an innate thing that makes someone manly or feminine. Mizuki's troubles with transformation reveal how the subject, or subjects, can be constituted. The performance continues. I can see how many in the transgender community would have problems with Boku Girl. After all, its depiction of gender seems quite non-fluid, that there is this biological essentialism behind it, and I can absolutely sympathize with these concerns. Yet I think Boku Girl is more useful as a case of understanding how doing is being, and the parameters of that doing is constituted by structures outside of us, so its messages aren't limited to just gender. And the heteronormative structures in Boku Girl are inescapably problematic from a trans lens, but that inescapability is precisely why such constitutions can happen in the first place. After all, to Butler, the body is not merely matter, but a continual and incessant materializing of possibilities. Boku Girl unveils those possibilities, as limited as they may seem. Honestly, I don't see Boku Girl as an exemplary transgender piece. Rather, I see it as a work of just, or at least primarily, performance and understanding of how things beyond us can change us, but also how we do or behave in ways that continually builds on an identity. Again, the performance continues. But Boku Girl isn't alone, and when we dive even further, we find that performance in anime and manga are actually highly varied. So let's change this up a little bit. Let's go back quite a few years to 1953.
Hey there everybody, thank you very much for checking the video out. I hugely appreciate you guys taking the time to take a look at it. Lots of shoutouts to people. A lot of people helped me out with proofing the script. I hugely appreciate it. In addition to that, definitely huge shout out to Otaku Deity for helping me with double checking Sugido's blog. I really appreciate that. Please send him some love. Also, if you're interested in YouTube channels, check out KYDB. KYDB is a really interesting YouTube channel in that it's a lot of funny anime videos. He's got a hilarious video on Musashi Gundo that I will be linking in the video, and I hope you guys enjoy it. A huge thanks to everybody who's supporting me on Patreon. It's majorly helpful, and I cannot stress that enough. Thank you very much again. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Peace.